In the fog-shrouded winter of 1840, in a forgotten corner of the English countryside, Elara Thornwood exists, but does not live. 24 years ago, on the night of her birth, a scorned witch cursed her with a fate worse than death, the inability to feel love in any form. No warmth from her mother's embrace, no joy in friendship, no flutter of romance, no connection to another soul. She is a ghost among the living, watching the world through glass, forever separate, forever alone. The curse has made her heart a frozen wasteland, and after 2 decades of this living death, she has accepted that she will never know what it means to be human. But on the night of the blood moon, when the sky bleeds crimson and the veil between worlds grows thin, a vampire named Lucian appears at her crumbling estate. He is ancient, beautiful, and dying, not from age, but from the same curse that binds her. For 300 years, he has searched for the one person who shares his affliction, the one person whose kiss under the blood moon might break both their curses. But the price of freedom is steep, and neither of them knows that love, once awakened after a lifetime of absence, burns so fiercely it can destroy everything in its path. The story begins on the night Elara decides to end her cursed existence, standing at the edge of Thornwood Cliff with nothing left to lose. That's when she hears footsteps behind her, and a voice like velvet and smoke asks, "Do you really want to die, or do you just want to feel something?" What follows is a tale of 2 cursed souls who must choose between eternal numbness and a love so powerful it might kill them both. This is not a story of happily ever after. This is a story of what happens when 2 people who have forgotten how to feel discover that sometimes the greatest tragedy is not dying unloved, but finally learning to love when it's too late to save each other. The cold bit through Elara's cloak as she stood at the edge of Thornwood Cliff, staring down at the rocks below, where the sea crashed in violent white-capped fury. The wind whipped her dark hair across her face, but she felt nothing. Not the sting of cold, not the fear of death, not even the whisper of self-preservation that should have pulled her back from the edge. 24 years of existing in this numb purgatory had taught her that survival was not the same as living, and she was so very tired of merely surviving. The moon hung bloated and red in the November sky, bleeding its crimson light across the landscape like a wound that wouldn't heal. They called it the blood moon, this rare celestial event that occurred once every 30 years, and the superstitious villagers had locked themselves inside their homes, praying to be spared from whatever evil such an omen might bring. Elara wished she could fear something, anything. Even supernatural dread would be better than this endless void where emotions should be. She closed her eyes and leaned forward, feeling the emptiness where terror should have flooded her veins, where some primal instinct should have screamed for her to stop. But there was nothing, just as there had always been nothing. Her mother had died trying to love her, worn down by years of embracing a daughter who couldn't return affection, who looked at her with eyes as empty as a doll's. Her father had drunk himself into an early grave, unable to bear the sight of the cursed thing his only child had become. The servants had left one by one, unnerved by her blank stare and mechanical movements. Now Thornwood Manor stood empty behind her, a crumbling monument to a family destroyed by a witch's revenge. And Elara was finally ready to let the sea have what the curse had already taken, her life. "Do you really want to die, or do you just want to feel something?" The voice came from behind her, smooth as silk and dark as midnight, and it should have startled her into stepping back from the precipice. But Elara couldn't be startled, couldn't feel surprise or fear, so she simply turned slowly, her movements careful on the cliff's edge, to face the stranger who had appeared as if materializing from the blood-red moonlight itself. He was tall, impossibly so, with hair as black as a raven's wing that fell to his shoulders in waves that seemed to move independent of the wind. His face was beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful, sharp cheekbones, a jaw cut from marble, lips that were too perfect to be human. But it was his eyes that held her attention, pale silver eyes that gleamed in the darkness like mirrors, reflecting her own emptiness back at her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice flat and devoid of curiosity. Though somewhere in the vast wasteland of her consciousness, she registered that this was unusual, that people didn't simply appear on private property in the dead of night during a blood moon. The man smiled, and she saw the flash of something white and sharp, too sharp, before he stepped closer, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the laws of nature. He wore clothing from another era, a long black coat that swept around him like wings, and there was something ancient in the way he carried himself. Something that spoke of centuries rather than years. "My name is Lucian Ashford, and I've been searching for you for a very long time. Elara Thornwood." His use of her name should have alarmed her, but alarm required the capacity for fear, so she merely studied him with the same detached interest she might give to a painting or a piece of furniture. "You know my name," she stated, not quite a question. "How?" He moved closer still, until he stood just an arm's length away, and she could see that his skin held an unnatural pallor, as if he hadn't seen sunlight in years. "I know everything about you. I know that on the night you were born, Millicent Ashwood came to your mother's birthing chamber. I know that your father had broken his promise to marry Millicent's daughter, choosing your mother instead for her larger dowry. I know that Millicent, who was the last true witch in these lands, placed a curse upon you in revenge, that you would never know love in any form, that your heart would be as cold and dead as stone, that you would live your life as a ghost among the living." Elara felt something then, or perhaps it was the ghost of something, a flutter in the vast emptiness where her emotions should have been. "How could you possibly know that?" she asked, and for the first time in her life, her voice held the barest hint of inflection. Lucian's smile turned sad, ancient grief flickering across his perfect features. "Because I carry the same curse, Elara. Millicent Ashwood was my sister's descendant, and 300 years ago I wronged her ancestor in a way that cannot be forgiven. I'm vampire, yes. You can see the truth of that in my teeth, in my eyes, in the way I move. But even vampires can feel. We love, we hate, we desire, we grieve, except me. The witch who cursed me took away my ability to feel any emotion at all. And for 3 centuries I have walked this earth as you have walked it, dead inside. A monster who cannot even feel the satisfaction of the kill." He gestured to the blood moon, hanging heavy in the sky. "Once every generation the blood moon rises, and on this night the curse can be broken. But only by 2 souls who share the same affliction, only by a kiss exchanged between 2 hearts that have never known love." He extended his hand to her, pale and elegant and trembling slightly. "I have searched the world for you, Elara. You are the only other person cursed by Millicent's bloodline. You are the only one who can set us both free." Elara looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face, those silver eyes that reflected her own emptiness. "And if I refuse? If I step off this cliff right now?" Lucian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, not hope, because hope required feeling, but perhaps recognition of a kindred spirit. "Then we both remain cursed for eternity. You will die, yes, but I will continue on, unable to feel relief at your passing, unable to grieve, unable to rage at the injustice. I will simply exist, as I have existed for 300 years, waiting for a salvation that will never come." She studied him for a long moment. This impossible creature who claimed to understand the vast emptiness that had defined her entire existence. "If the curse is broken, what then? What happens to people like us when we suddenly feel everything we've been denied?" Lucian lowered his hand slowly. "I don't know, but it has to be better than this, doesn't it? This half-life, this shadow existence. Aren't you curious, even a little, about what it would be like to feel joy, to feel sorrow, to feel love? Curious." The word hung in the air between them. Was she curious? She tried to examine herself, to find any spark of wonder or interest, but there was only the same endless void. Except, and this was new, there was. Something else now, something she had never experienced before. A question, a what if. The tiniest seed of possibility taking root in the wasteland of her soul. What do we have to do? She heard herself ask. And Lucian's face transformed with something that might have been relief if either of them could feel such things. We wait until midnight, when the blood moon reaches its apex. Then we kiss, and the curse breaks for both of us or for neither. The magic requires balance, symmetry, two halves of a broken whole coming together. He glanced up at the sky, at the red moon that seemed to pulse like a beating heart.
We have an hour.
Will you spend it with me? Will you tell me about your life so that in case this works, in case we're about to feel everything we've been denied, I'll know something about the woman who saved me? Elara stepped back from the cliff's edge, not because she had chosen life, but because standing here talking to this strange vampire felt no different than stepping off into oblivion. And at least this path offered the possibility of something new, some deviation from the script of her empty existence. We should go inside, she said, turning toward Thornwood Manor, its dark windows reflecting the blood-red moonlight. The wind is getting stronger. Lucian fell into step beside her, his movements preternaturally silent. You don't feel the cold, he observed. Why do you care about the wind? She considered this as they walked across the frost-covered grounds. Habit, I suppose. I've spent my whole life pretending to be normal, responding the way I think people expect me to respond. It's easier than explaining that I feel nothing. Yes, Lucian said softly, the performance of humanity. I know it well. They entered the manor through the heavy oak doors, and Elara led him to the library, the only room she still bothered to maintain. A fire burned in the hearth, though she felt neither its warmth nor pleasure in its light. She had built it because that's what one did on cold November nights, because following the patterns of normal life gave structure to the emptiness. Lucian moved to the fireplace, holding his pale hands toward the flames, and she realized he was doing the same thing, performing the gestures of warmth-seeking, even though the cold meant nothing to him. Tell me about the first time you realized you were different, he said, turning to face her. Elara sat in the wing-back chair that had been her father's, its leather cracked with age. I don't remember not knowing. My mother used to tell me stories about my infancy, how I never cried, never smiled, never reached for her. She thought I was a good baby at first, so quiet and calm. But as I grew older, she realized the truth. I was 3 when she finally understood that I would never love her back. She paused, not because the memory hurt, it couldn't hurt, but because she was trying to find the words to describe an absence of feeling to someone who might actually understand. She died when I was 10. The doctor said her heart simply gave out, but I think she died of grief, of loving someone who couldn't love her back. Lucian moved to sit across from her, his ancient eyes studying her face. My curse came differently. I was a young vampire, barely a century old, arrogant and cruel, as only the young can be. I fell in love with a mortal woman, but she was promised to another, a warlock from Millicent's line. I killed him and took her for myself, and I thought I was invincible, that love and desire made me powerful. But the warlock's mother cursed me with this. She took away every feeling I had ever known, including the love that had driven me to murder. The woman I had killed for looked at me afterward, and I felt nothing. No passion, no affection, no regret for what I had done to possess her. She went mad, I think, trying to revive feelings in a creature who had become a beautiful corpse. Eventually she threw herself from a tower, and I watched her fall without sorrow, without guilt, without anything at all. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence that followed his confession. Elara found herself looking at him more closely, seeing not just the beautiful monster, but the man who had once been capable of feeling enough to kill for love, who had been punished by having all of that stripped away. Do you remember what it felt like? She asked. Before the curse? His silver eyes grew distant. Sometimes I think I do, but I don't know if they're real memories or just shadows, ghosts of emotions I can no longer access. I remember the shape of love, the outline of it, but not the substance. It's like trying to remember a dream after waking. You know it was important, but the details slip away. I've never known any of it, Elara said. Not even shadows. What I know about love, I've read in books or seen in others. My mother's tears, my father's drinking, the servants' frightened whispers. I understood intellectually that these were expressions of feeling, but I couldn't comprehend them from the inside. I'm 24 years old, and I've never felt a moment of happiness, never known fear, never experienced anger or jealousy or hope. She looked down at her hands, pale and still in her lap. Sometimes I wonder if I'm even human, or if the curse took that away too, leaving just this shell that breathes and moves, but lacks whatever essential spark makes a person real. Lucian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, closing the distance between them. You are human, Elara. Cursed, yes, but human. I've walked this earth for 300 years, and I've never met anyone who shares this particular prison. You're the only person in the world who truly understands what this is like. The only one who knows what it means to be hollow. For the first time in her life, Elara felt a flicker of something that might have been connection, though she had no reference point for what connection should feel like. What if the curse breaks and we discover that feeling is worse than not feeling? What if love is painful, or joy is fleeting, or fear is overwhelming? Lucian smiled, and there was something almost human in it. Then at least we'll know. At least we'll be alive, truly alive, even if only for a moment. She stood, moving to the window where the blood moon cast its crimson light across the frost-covered grounds. There's something I should tell you. Something I've never told anyone, because there was no one who would understand. She sensed, rather than heard him rise and move to stand beside her. When I was 16, I tried to make myself feel. I cut my arm, thinking physical pain might break through the numbness. But I felt nothing, not the knife's bite, not the blood flowing, nothing. I've tried everything. I've stood in freezing water until my lips turned blue. I've starved myself until I collapsed. I've read every book on philosophy and emotion trying to understand what I'm missing. And the worst part isn't the absence of feeling. It's the absence of hope that I'll ever feel. It's the certainty that this is all there is, this vast emptiness forever. Lucian was quiet for a moment, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. I've done the same. I've sought out every possible sensation, thrown myself into danger, hunted the most vicious prey, surrounded myself with beauty and horror and everything in between, trying to provoke some response. But nothing works. The curse is absolute. Until tonight. He turned to face her fully, and she found herself looking into those silver eyes that were like mirrors of her own soul. In 40 minutes, we'll kiss under the blood moon, and either we'll finally feel something, or we'll remain as we are. But Elara, I need you to understand, if this works, if the curse breaks, everything changes. We won't be the same people we are now. Whatever feelings flood into us will be overwhelming, decades or centuries of accumulated emotion hitting us all at once. You sound afraid, she observed. If I could feel fear, I would be terrified, he admitted. But I want this more than I've ever wanted anything, even though want itself is just a memory of an emotion for me now. Elara looked back out at the blood moon, watching as it climbed higher in the sky, approaching its apex. I was going to jump tonight. I was ready to end this. If the curse doesn't break, I'll go back to that cliff and finish what I started. Lucian reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and gently touched her hand with his cold fingers. Neither of them felt the touch, but the gesture itself carried meaning, a promise made by two people who couldn't feel the weight of promises. If the curse doesn't break, I'll jump with you, he said quietly. 300 years is enough. I don't want to face another lifetime of this emptiness without even the hope of salvation. They stood together in silence, two cursed souls bound by a shared absence, watching the blood moon rise toward midnight. Elara felt the mechanical beating of her heart, steady and meaningless, and wondered what it would feel like if it suddenly mattered, if it suddenly carried the weight of emotion through her veins. Around them, Thornwood Manor creaked and settled, a dying house holding two dying souls, waiting for either rebirth or final oblivion. Lucian checked the pocket watch he drew from his coat, its gold surface catching the firelight. 15 minutes, he said. We should go outside, to be directly under the moon when it reaches its apex. Elara nodded and retrieved her cloak, wrapping it around her shoulders in the performance of seeking warmth. They walked together through the empty corridors of the manor, past portraits of Thornwood ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow their movement with judgment or pity. Elara couldn't tell which and couldn't care either way. The night air hit them as they stepped outside, and the blood moon dominated the sky, so large and red it seemed like the world was ending, like the heavens themselves were bleeding out. Lucian led her to the center of the garden, where a stone fountain stood dry and forgotten, its basin filled with dead leaves and the brittle remains of last summer's flowers. Here, he said. This spot is directly beneath the moon's path. They stood facing each other, and Elara studied his face. Beautiful, cold, perfect, and utterly empty of expression. She wondered if she looked the same to him, if her face was equally blank, a beautiful mask with nothing behind it. "How will we know when it's time?" she asked. Lucian looked up at the moon, then back at her. "We'll know. The magic is old, older than both our curses combined. When the moment comes, we'll feel the pull of it, even if we can't feel anything else." They waited in silence, and Elara became aware of the sounds around them, the distant crash of waves against the cliff, the whisper of wind through bare tree branches, an owl calling somewhere in the darkness. She catalogued these sounds mechanically, filing them away in the vast library of meaningless observations that made up her existence. And then something changed. It wasn't a feeling exactly, because she couldn't feel, but it was a presence, a weight in the air, a sense of gathering power that even her cursed senses could detect. The moonlight seemed to intensify, growing brighter and redder, until it felt like they were standing in a pool of blood-colored light that separated them from the rest of the world. "Now," Lucian breathed, and she saw something in his eyes, not emotion but awareness. Recognition that this was the moment their entire existences had been leading toward. He stepped closer, and she tilted her face up to his, their heights requiring this adjustment. His hands came up to cup her face, cold fingers against her cold cheeks, and somewhere in the vast emptiness of her being, she registered that this should mean something, this gesture of tenderness from a creature who couldn't feel tenderness. Her own hands rose almost of their own accord, resting lightly on his chest, where his heart, assuming vampires had hearts, should have been beating. She felt nothing beneath her palms, no pulse, no warmth, nothing to indicate life or unlife, just the solid reality of his presence, this ancient creature who had searched centuries for her, for this moment, for the possibility of salvation. "If this doesn't work," she started to say, but Lucian shook his head slightly. Don't think about what comes after. Just be here now, in this moment." And then he leaned down, closing the distance between them with agonizing slowness, as if even he, who had lived for 3 centuries, needed to steel himself for whatever came next. Their lips met beneath the blood moon, and for one eternal second, nothing happened. Elara felt the pressure of his mouth against hers, cool and soft, but there was no spark, no magic, no sudden rush of sensation. This was just a physical action, 2 bodies touching, meaningless as everything else in her life had been meaningless. Disappointment, she thought, should have flooded through her. This was the moment she should have felt despair, should have grieved for the hope that had been dangled before her and snatched away. But she felt nothing, just as she had always felt nothing. And she began to pull away, ready to accept that this had been a fool's errand. The curses couldn't be broken by fairy tale solutions, but then, oh God, then, it hit her like lightning, like being struck by every feeling that should have existed in her 24 years of life, all crashing into her at once. The sensation exploded through her with such violence that Elara's knees buckled, and only Lucian's arms around her kept her from collapsing to the cold ground. It wasn't just one feeling, it was everything at once. 24 years of suppressed emotion detonating in her chest like a bomb that had been waiting her entire life to go off. Joy crashed into her first, pure and brilliant and so intense it was almost painful, the simple ecstasy of feeling anything after a lifetime of numbness. But joy brought its twin sister sorrow racing behind it. Grief for all the years she had lost, for her mother who had died unloved, for her father who had drunk himself to death trying to forget his cursed daughter. Fear came next, primal and overwhelming, the terror she should have felt standing on that cliff edge, the horror of how close she had come to ending her existence just moments before discovering what it meant to be alive. And beneath it all, threading through every other emotion like golden wire, was something else. Something that made her gasp and clutch at Lucian's coat with desperate fingers. She felt his arms around her, the strength of them, the solidness of his body against hers, and the crushing, overwhelming realization that she was not alone, that someone held her, that someone understood. Lucian made a sound against her mouth, something between a gasp and a sob, and she realized he was experiencing the same catastrophic awakening. 300 years of denied feeling flooding into him all at once. He broke the kiss and buried his face in her neck, his whole body trembling violently, and she felt his tears, cold vampire tears, sliding down her skin. And the sensation of those tears, the wetness and the grief they represented, made her own eyes burn with moisture she had never experienced before. "Oh God," Lucian choked out, his voice raw and broken. "Oh God, I remember now. I remember what it was like. I remember everything I lost." His arms tightened around her almost painfully, and she felt the desperation in his grip, the need to hold on to something solid while the world remade itself around them. Elara couldn't speak, couldn't form words through the storm of sensation battering her from the inside. She could feel everything, the cold night air biting through her cloak, the racing of her heart that suddenly mattered, the texture of Lucian's coat beneath her fingers, the strength of his embrace, the overwhelming presence of another person, not just holding her but feeling with her. Sharing this impossible moment of rebirth, they sank to the ground together, neither able to stand under the weight of their newly awakened souls. And Elara found herself cradling Lucian's head against her chest while he shook with the force of 3 centuries of accumulated emotion. She could feel his pain radiating off him in waves, and the realization that she could feel his pain, that she could sense another person's suffering and be moved by it, made her own tears fall faster. "I can feel you," she whispered, wonder and anguish mixing in her voice. "I can feel you feeling. I can feel your grief, and it breaks my heart. And I have a heart now. I have a heart that can break." Lucian raised his head, and she saw his face transformed by emotion, his silver eyes bright with tears, his perfect features twisted with a grief so profound it seemed to age him before her eyes. "Elara," he said, and just the sound of her name in his voice, colored now with feeling and recognition and something deeper she couldn't yet name, made her breath catch. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it, for the man I killed, for the woman who loved me, for every death I caused without remorse, for 300 years of being a monster who couldn't even feel monstrous." She reached up with shaking hands to touch his face, feeling the cool smoothness of his skin, the wetness of his tears, the reality of him. "You were cursed," she said, and hearing her own voice filled with compassion, with understanding, with care for another person's suffering, was like hearing a stranger speak with her mouth. "We were both cursed. We couldn't feel remorse because the capacity for remorse was stolen from us." But Lucian shook his head, his expression tormented. "That doesn't absolve me. I chose to kill that warlock. I chose to take his woman. The curse came after, as punishment for choices I made when I could still feel when I should have known better. Your curse was placed on you at birth. You never had a choice. But I did, and I squandered my humanity on jealousy and possession. And then I lost it entirely as punishment for my sins." Elara felt something new then, something that flickered to life in her chest like a candle being lit in a dark room. It took her a moment to recognize it, because she had no reference for what it should feel like. But as it grew stronger, as it wrapped around her heart and squeezed gently, she understood with sudden clarity that this was love, or the beginning of it. Not the passionate, consuming fire that poets wrote about, but something quieter, deeper, empathy, connection, the recognition of a kindred soul, and the desire to ease his suffering. "Lucian," she said softly, drawing his attention back to her face. "Look at me." He met her eyes, and she felt the impact of that gaze like a physical touch, felt the intimacy of truly seeing and being seen. "You've carried this guilt for 300 years without the ability to process it, without the ability to forgive yourself or seek redemption. But you searched for me. You spent centuries looking for a way to break the curse, not just for yourself, but for me too, for someone you'd never met who you knew must be suffering as you suffered. That means something. That counts for something." Fresh tears spilled down his cheeks, and she wiped them away with her thumbs, marveling at the tenderness in the gesture, at the fact that she wanted to comfort him, that his pain hurt her, and his ease would bring her relief. "I don't deserve your kindness," Lucian whispered. "I don't deserve to feel this, to feel you caring about me when I've been such a monster." Elara leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, closing her eyes against the intensity of the connection between them. "Maybe neither of us deserves this. Maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that we have it now, that we're alive now, that we can feel now, and we get to choose what to do with these feelings." They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing together, learning the rhythm of shared existence, feeling the miracle of emotional connection after lifetimes of isolation. The blood moon continued its arc across the sky, its crimson light bathing them in color, and Elara realized with a start that she could see the beauty of it now, could appreciate the way the red light transformed the frost-covered garden into something magical and strange. "What do we do now?" Lucian asked, his voice barely audible. "How do we live with this? It's so much, Elara. It's so much all at once." She pulled back enough to look at him properly, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, the fear and wonder and overwhelming confusion of someone who had forgotten how to navigate the landscape of emotion. "We learn," she said, and felt the truth of it settling into her bones. "We learn together. We figure out how to process feelings, how to manage them, how to live with them. We have each other now. We're not alone anymore." Something shifted in Lucian's expression at those words, a softening that made him look younger, despite his ancient eyes. "Not alone," he repeated, as if testing the concept. "I've been alone for so long, I forgot what it meant to share existence with someone else." Elara helped him to his feet, and they stood together on shaking legs, steadying each other. Two people learning how to be human, or in Lucian's case, learning how to be a feeling creature again after centuries of emotional death. She looked up at the manor, its dark windows and crumbling facade, and felt a sudden wave of something that might have been hope or possibility, or simply the awareness that tomorrow would be different from today, that the future stretched ahead filled with sensation and experience rather than endless numbing repetition. "Come inside," she said, taking his hand and marveling at the simple miracle of wanting to hold someone's hand, of feeling the cool press of his palm against hers and finding comfort in it. "We should sit by the fire and talk. We have so much to talk about, so much to figure out." They walked back through the garden, moving slowly, both of them overwhelmed by the sensory input that suddenly mattered, the crunch of frost under their feet, the bite of wind against exposed skin, the sound of their own breathing in the quiet night. Inside the library, the fire had burned lower, and Elara felt actual relief at its warmth, felt her body responding to temperature in a way it never had before. She added more wood, and Lucian watched her with an intensity that she could feel like weight on her skin. "What is it?" she asked, turning to face him. "You're looking at me like I'm something precious." His expression grew tender, and she felt her heart skip in response to that tenderness, to the clear care in his silver eyes. "You are precious." You're the only person in the world who truly understands what we've been through. The only person who knows what it means to be hollow and then to be filled. You're precious to me, Elara, and that's terrifying because I've just learned how to feel again, and I'm already afraid of losing you." She moved to him. Drawn by instinct she was only just discovering, and took both his hands in hers. "I'm afraid too," she admitted. "I'm afraid of all of this, afraid of feeling too much, afraid of not knowing how to handle these emotions, afraid that this is all too good to be true and something will go wrong. But I'm also grateful, so deeply grateful that I met you, that you found me, that we broke the curse together." Lucian brought her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, and the gesture sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "We need to be careful," he said quietly. "We need to learn how to manage these feelings before they overwhelm us completely. Right now everything is new and intense, but we need to remember that we're essentially infants when it comes to emotional regulation. We have decades of experience with numbness and no experience at all with feeling." Elara nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words, even as part of her wanted to protest, wanted to dive headfirst into every sensation without caution or restraint. "You're right. We should take this slowly, learn our own responses before we make any decisions or commitments." But even as she said it, she felt the pull between them, the magnetic attraction of two people who had shared the most profound experience of their lives, who understood each other in ways no one else could. Lucian seemed to feel it too, because he gently released her hands and stepped back, putting physical distance between them. "I should tell you something," he said, his expression growing serious. "Now that the curse is broken, now that I can feel again, I need to face what I've done. 300 years of killing without remorse, of treating humans as prey, of being a monster. I need to reckon with that, need to figure out how to live with the guilt of it." Elara felt his pain like it was her own, felt the crushing weight of his conscience awakening after centuries of silence. "That will be hard," she said softly. "That will be incredibly hard, but you don't have to face it alone." He looked at her with something like wonder. "How can you be so kind to me? How can you not be horrified by what I am, by what I've done?" She considered this carefully, examining her own feelings, trying to understand the strange absence of fear or revulsion. "Because I understand what the curse did to you. I understand what it's like to act without feeling the moral weight of your actions. And because—" she paused, uncertain but pushed forward, "because I'm falling in love with you, I think. Or maybe I'm already in love with you. I don't know what love is supposed to feel like. But when I look at you, when I think about you, my heart does something different, something that feels significant and precious and terrifying all at once. Presence." Lucian wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and they sat in silence for a while, simply feeling the peace of companionship, of not being alone. "Tell me about your life," Elara said eventually. "Tell me about the 300 years before the curse when you could feel. What was it like?" Lucian was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently tracing patterns on her shoulder. "I was born in 1523, in a time very different from this one. I was the third son of a minor noble, which meant I had status, but no real prospects. I was 25 when I was turned. I fell in love with a vampire woman who promised me eternal life and eternal passion. She turned me and then left me, bored with me before I'd even adjusted to my new existence." He paused, and Elara felt tension in his body. Being a vampire when you can feel is intoxicating. Everything is heightened, sensations, emotions, desires. The bloodlust is intense, but manageable when you have a conscience to guide you. I tried to be ethical about my feeding, taking only from those who wouldn't be missed, never killing if I could avoid it. But then I met Isabel. His voice grew soft with old memory, old grief. She was beautiful, brilliant, engaged to marry a warlock she didn't love, and I was obsessed with her from the moment I saw her. I convinced myself that I was saving her, that taking her from a loveless match was heroic rather than selfish. I killed her fiancé in a duel, made it look like a fair fight, and then I courted her relentlessly. She fell in love with me, or she convinced herself she did, and for a few months I thought I had everything I wanted. But the warlock's mother saw through my deception. She knew I had murdered her son, knew that I had stolen his bride, and she cursed me on the night of our wedding. Isabel stood there watching as the curse took hold, watching as every feeling drained out of me like water from a cracked vessel. She tried everything to bring back the man I had been, but I was gone, completely gone, replaced by a beautiful corpse that moved and spoke but felt nothing. Elara tightened her arm around his waist, offering comfort. How long before she died? Lucian's voice was barely audible. 5 years. 5 years of her desperately trying to evoke some response from me, some flicker of the love I had claimed to feel. I watched her deteriorate, watched the light go out of her eyes, and felt nothing. When she threw herself from the tower, I stood at the window and watched her fall without a trace of sorrow or regret. That's when I truly understood what the curse had done. It had made me into a monster more completely than vampirism ever had. Because at least vampires with their feelings intact can feel remorse. Elara felt tears on her cheeks again, crying for a woman dead over 200 years, crying for the man who had watched her die without feeling. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry that happened to both of you. After that, I stopped pretending to be anything other than what I was. I fed when I wanted, killed when it was convenient, wandered the world without purpose or direction. I accumulated wealth because it was useful, learned languages because time meant nothing to me, watched centuries pass with complete detachment. And then, about 50 years ago, I found a journal written by the witch who had cursed me. In it, she mentioned that she had cursed others in her bloodline, that the curse could be passed down through generations. She wrote about you, Elara, about a child who would be born cursed in the same way I was cursed. And she wrote about the blood moon, about the possibility of breaking the curse if two cursed souls could find each other." He looked down at her, his silver eyes intense. "I spent 50 years searching for you. I tracked down every descendant of that witch's bloodline, followed every lead, until finally I found records of the Thornwood family, of a child born on the night Millicent Ashwood came to curse her. I arrived at your estate this morning, watched you from the shadows, waited for the blood moon to rise so I could approach you with my proposition. Elara processed this, understanding now the full weight of what Lucian had done, the decades of searching, the hope that must have sustained him even though he couldn't feel hope. "What if I had jumped before you could reach me?" she asked quietly. "What if I'd been just a few minutes faster?" Lucian's arms tightened around her convulsively. "I don't know. I try not to think about it, about how close I came to losing you, to losing this chance at salvation. When I saw you standing at that cliff's edge, I moved faster than I've ever moved, desperate to reach you in time, even though desperation was just a memory to me then." She turned in his arms to face him fully, searching his face. "I'm glad you found me. I'm glad you reached me in time. I'm glad for all of it, even the pain of feeling, because the pain means I'm alive." They talked through the night, sharing stories, learning each other's histories, exploring the strange new landscape of emotional connection. Elara told him about her lonely childhood, about her mother's desperate attempts to love her, about her father's decline into alcoholism, about the servants who left one by one until she was completely alone in the crumbling manor. Lucian shared his memories of centuries past, of wars and plagues, of the changing world seen through emotionally dead eyes, of the strange detachment of watching history unfold without caring about any of it. As dawn approached, Elara felt exhaustion settling into her bones, a tiredness that was somehow satisfying, because it meant she had lived fully through the night, had experienced so much that her body needed rest to process it all. "You should sleep," Lucian said gently, noticing her yawns. "Your body needs rest, especially after the emotional upheaval of tonight." But Elara didn't want to let go of him, didn't want to return to solitude even for the space of sleep. "Will you stay?" she asked. "Will you be here when I wake?" Lucian pressed a kiss to her forehead, and the tenderness of the gesture made her throat tight with emotion. "I'll be right here," he promised. "I'll watch over you while you sleep. I don't need rest the way you do, and there's nowhere else I want to be." Reassured, Elara allowed her eyes to close, her head resting on his chest, lulled by the strange comfort of his presence. As she drifted toward sleep, she felt his fingers stroking her hair gently, and she thought that this simple moment of being cared for, of being watched over, of being valued by another person, might be the most precious thing she had ever experienced. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons in managing overwhelming emotion, new questions about how they would navigate this strange connection between a cursed human and a vampire learning to feel again. But for now, for this perfect suspended moment, Elara let herself simply be happy, simply be grateful, simply be alive. Elara woke to afternoon sunlight streaming through the library windows and the immediate awareness that Lucian was gone. Panic seized her, sharp and visceral and terrifying in its intensity, and she sat up abruptly, her heart racing. Had it all been a dream? Had she imagined the curse breaking, the flood of feeling, the connection with the impossible vampire who understood her? But then she saw the note on the table beside her, written in elegant script that could only belong to someone who had learned penmanship in a different century. "Elara, I've gone to hunt before my hunger becomes dangerous. I'll return before nightfall. The feelings are overwhelming, but knowing I'll see you again makes them bearable. Please don't doubt yourself or last night. Everything was real. Everything matters. I'll explain more when I return. Wait for me. L." She clutched the note to her chest, feeling relief wash through her so powerfully it made her dizzy. He had left to protect her, not because he was abandoning her. He would return. Everything was real. She read the note 3 more times, memorizing every word, finding comfort in the physical evidence that last night had actually happened. The emotions cycling through her were exhausting. Relief, fear, anticipation, loneliness, hope. And she realized this must be what normal people dealt with every day. This constant parade of feeling that colored every moment. How did anyone function like this? How did people make decisions or accomplish tasks when their internal landscape was in constant flux? She stood on shaking legs and made her way through the manor to her bedroom, catching sight of herself in a tarnished mirror along the way. She looked different, not physically exactly, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A light, an aliveness, evidence of a soul that had finally awakened. Her reflection smiled at her experimentally, and she watched in fascination as the smile reached her eyes, creating warmth in her expression that she had never seen before. After washing and changing into fresh clothing, Elara found herself at loose ends. For 24 years, she had moved through her days in mechanical routine, performing the tasks of living without engagement or interest. But now, every action seemed charged with significance, every moment an opportunity to feel something new. She made tea in the kitchen and marveled at the taste of it, at the way warmth spread through her body, at the simple pleasure of a hot drink on a cold day. She wandered through the manor, seeing it with new eyes, the shabbiness of the furnishings, the dust coating every surface, the general decay of a house that had been maintained without love or care. She felt a strange stirring in her chest that she identified after a moment as desire, the desire to fix this place, to make it beautiful again, to create a home rather than just a structure to exist in. But underneath the simple domestic impulses ran a current of deeper feeling, worry about Lucian, about what he was experiencing as he hunted for the first time with his conscience awakened. Would he be able to feed? Would the guilt overwhelm him? Would he regret breaking the curse, regret the weight of emotion after 3 centuries of numbness? She tried to distract herself by reading, but the books that had occupied her empty hours for years now seemed flat and uninteresting compared to the vividness of actual experience. She paced the library, watching the sun track across the sky, counting the hours until Lucian's promised return. When had she become this person, this anxious creature whose entire focus was on when she would see him again. Was this normal? Was this healthy? She had no framework for understanding romantic attachment, no experience to draw on, and the intensity of what she felt for him was both thrilling and terrifying. As evening approached and shadows lengthened across the grounds, Elara found herself at the window, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. When she finally saw him emerge from the tree line, her heart leaped in a way that was becoming familiar, and she rushed to the door, throwing it open before he could knock. Lucian stood on the threshold looking haggard, his perfect features drawn with strain, his silver eyes haunted. "Elara," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. She didn't hesitate, didn't question, just pulled him inside and wrapped her arms around him, feeling him sag against her as if she were the only thing holding him up. They stood like that for a long moment, and she could feel tremors running through his body, could sense the turmoil roiling inside him. "Come sit by the fire," she said softly. "Tell me what happened." In the library, with firelight playing, across his pale features, Lucian looked more vampire than he had the night before, dangerous, otherworldly, ancient. But his eyes were devastatingly human in their pain, and Elara felt her heart ache for whatever he had endured. "I hunted," he said simply, his voice flat. "I found a man traveling alone on the road, someone who wouldn't be missed immediately. I approached him the way I've approached thousands of humans over 300 years, silent, quick, efficient. I drank from him, took what I needed to sustain myself, left him alive but weak." He looked down at his hands, as if seeing blood on them. "But this time I felt everything. I felt his fear like knives cutting into me. I felt his pain as my teeth pierced his skin. I felt his despair, his confusion, his violation. And I felt my own shame, my own disgust at what I am, at what I have to do to survive." Elara moved closer to him on the sofa, taking his cold hands in hers. "But you didn't kill him. You showed restraint." Lucian's laugh was bitter. "Restraint? Yes, I suppose I did, but the restraint cost me everything. The bloodlust was overwhelming, magnified by emotion, and every instinct screamed at me to drain him dry, to take everything. I had to fight myself, had to use 300 years of practiced control to stop before I killed him. And even then, even having shown this miraculous restraint, I hated myself. I hated what I am, what I'm condemned to be, the monster I can never stop being, no matter how much I feel, no matter how much I wish I could be different." Tears were streaming down his face now, and Elara wiped them away gently, her own eyes burning with sympathetic grief. "You are not just a monster," she said firmly. "You're a person who was turned into a vampire against your will, who was then cursed to lose all feeling, who survived 300 years of emptiness and still managed to search for a way to break the curse, to save both of us. That takes strength. That takes something more than monstrosity." He looked at her with desperate intensity. "How can you see me as anything other than what I am? You know what I've done, what I have to keep doing. How can you look at me without revulsion?" Elara considered this carefully, examining her own feelings. "Because I understand necessity. Because I know you didn't choose this. And because—" She paused, gathering courage. "Because when I look at you, I see someone who's trying, someone who's fighting to be better despite impossible circumstances. I see someone who makes me feel alive, who makes me believe that even cursed and broken as we were, we deserve happiness. You said last night that you're falling in love with me. Well, I'm falling in love with you too, Lucian, all of you, including the parts that frighten you." His expression crumbled, and he pulled her against him almost roughly, burying his face in her hair. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "I don't deserve this kindness, this acceptance." Elara held him tightly, feeling the rightness of it, the perfect fit of their bodies against each other. Maybe not. Maybe I don't deserve you either. But we have each other anyway, and I think we should stop questioning it and just be grateful." They stayed entwined as the fire burned low, finding comfort in simple physical closeness, learning the language of touch and affection. Eventually, Lucian pulled back enough to look at her face, his expression softening. "Tell me about your day. Tell me something that isn't about pain or fear or guilt. Tell me about learning to feel joy." Elara felt a smile tug at her lips. "I made tea this morning and I could taste it, really taste it. And it was wonderful, Lucian, this simple, ordinary thing that people do every day without thinking about it. I stood in the kitchen drinking tea and feeling grateful just to be able to taste it." His own smile was tentative but genuine. "The small things. Yes, I noticed those too. The texture of bark on trees as I ran through the forest, the smell of earth and decay, the sound of wind through branches. All things I observed without feeling for centuries. But today they meant something. They registered as experiences rather than just data." "We're going to be okay," Elara said with more confidence than she felt. "We're going to learn how to live with these feelings, how to balance the pain and the joy, how to be whatever we're becoming together." Lucian cupped her face in his hands, his silver eyes searching hers. "You make me want to believe that. You make me want to try, to fight through the guilt and shame, and find a way to exist that isn't just surviving but actually living." And then he kissed her, slow and deep, and Elara felt desire kindle in her body for the first time. Not just emotional connection but physical want, the need to be closer, to touch and be touched, to explore this new dimension of feeling. The kiss grew heated, urgent, and she felt Lucian's control slipping, felt the vampire in him rising to the surface, his movements becoming more predatory, more intense. She should have been frightened, probably, should have felt some preservation instinct kicking in. But all she felt was trust and desire and the overwhelming rightness of being wanted by him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Lucian looked shaken. "We should slow down," he said, his voice rough. "I should slow down. I'm not entirely in control of myself, and I don't want to hurt you." Elara felt frustration flash through her, sharp and hot. "Stop deciding what's best for me without asking me. I'm not fragile, Lucian. I'm not," she asked eventually. "What do we do with forever?" Lucian's arms tightened around her. "We live," he said simply. "We figure out how to build a life together. We face whatever challenges come. We love each other through all of it." The weeks that followed the blood bond were both beautiful and difficult. Elara and Lucian learned to navigate their new connection, discovering the advantages and challenges of feeling each other's emotions constantly. The advantages were obvious. They always knew what the other needed, could sense distress or joy immediately, never had to doubt or wonder about the other's feelings. But the challenges were significant too. When Lucian hunted, Elara felt his hunger and his guilt, experienced secondhand the moral struggle he went through with every feeding. When Elara had difficult days, when the weight of learning to process decades of suppressed emotion became too much, Lucian felt her pain as his own and struggled not to become overwhelmed trying to fix it for her. They learned to create small mental boundaries, ways of muting the bond slightly when privacy or emotional space was needed, but it required practice and concentration. Through it all, their love deepened, growing from the intense passion of early connection into something more solid and enduring. Winter settled over Thornwood Manor in earnest, and Elara began the work of reclaiming the house from decades of neglect. With Lucian's help and his supernatural strength made quick work of heavy repairs, they slowly transformed the crumbling estate into something resembling a home. Elara found unexpected joy in domestic tasks, in choosing fabrics and arranging furniture, and making decisions about her living space. For the first time in her life, she cared about her surroundings, wanted them to be beautiful and comfortable because she was actually living in them rather than just existing. Lucian watched her homemaking with tender amusement, occasionally offering opinions, but mostly content to let her create the environment she wanted. "You're making a nest," he observed one afternoon as she hung curtains in the drawing room. "You're creating a safe space, a place that's yours." She stepped back to examine her handiwork, feeling satisfaction in the way the heavy velvet blocked out the winter cold. "Ours," she corrected. "I'm making a space that's ours, a home for both of us." Through the bond, she felt his emotional response to her words, a wave of belonging and gratitude and love so intense it made her eyes sting with tears. He moved to embrace her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I've never had a home," he admitted quietly. "Not in 300 years. I've had lairs, hiding places, temporary residences, but never a home, never a place that mattered, never somewhere I wanted to return to. Until now, until you." Elara leaned back against him, feeling the solid comfort of his presence. "We're building something together, something that's just ours." They stood like that for a long moment, appreciating the simple domestic peace they were creating before Lucian spoke again. "There's something I need to tell you, something I've been putting off because I don't want to disrupt what we have." Through the bond, Elara felt his anxiety spike, felt worry creeping through their connection. She turned in his arms to face him. "What is it? What's wrong?" Lucian guided her to sit on the newly upholstered sofa, his expression serious. "You're mortal, Elara, human, and I'm not. You're going to age, and eventually you're going to die. I've been trying not to think about it, trying to just enjoy the time we have, but it haunts me. The knowledge that this is temporary, that you'll leave me, that I'll have to exist for eternity with your ghost in my soul through the blood bond." Elara felt ice settle in her stomach, though she had known this truth from the beginning. She just hadn't wanted to confront it directly. "How long do I have? How many years?" He took her hands, holding them gently. "If you live a natural human lifespan, perhaps 50 or 60 more years. But Elara, you're bonded to a vampire. That might shorten your life. The constant exposure to my nature, to the vampiric essence in the blood you consumed. Or it might lengthen it slightly. There's no way to know. Every bonded pair is different." She processed this, feeling through the bond that he had more to say, that he was building up to something. "There's another option, isn't there?" she asked quietly. "You could turn me, make me like you." Lucian's expression was tortured. "Yes, I could. If you wanted it, if you chose it, I could drain you to the point of death and then feed you my blood in sufficient quantity to complete the transformation. You would die as a human and be reborn as a vampire. We would have eternity together instead of just decades. But you don't want to do that," Elara said, reading his emotions through their connection. "Why not?" He stood abruptly, pacing to the window, his movements agitated. "Because being a vampire is a curse, Elara. It's darkness and blood and killing. It's watching everyone you knew as a human die while you continue unchanged. It's existing outside of humanity, forever separate, forever other. I wouldn't wish this existence on anyone, least of all you." She moved to stand beside him, looking out at the snow-covered grounds. "But we would be together. We wouldn't have to face the pain of separation, of you losing me and living on alone." Lucian turned to her, his silver eyes intense. "I love you too much to make that decision for you. If you want to become a vampire, if you truly want that, after understanding what it means, then I'll turn you. But Elara, I need you to really think about it, to understand what you'd be giving up. You would never see daylight again. You would have to feed on human blood to survive. You would watch the world change around you while you remained frozen at 24 for all eternity. You would become a predator, a killer, even if you... But that's not all of it." She turned to face him fully, making sure he could see the certainty in her eyes. "I was cursed to never feel love, never feel joy, never feel anything at all. I spent 24 years as a ghost. And now that I can finally feel, now that I understand what it means to be alive, I want more of it. I want centuries to explore, to experience, to learn. I want time to become everything I could never be during my cursed years. 50 or 60 years isn't enough, Lucian. It's not enough to make up for everything I lost. I want eternity. Through the bond, she felt his emotions churning, hope warring with fear, love mixing with guilt, desperate want fighting against protective instinct. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Truly certain? Because once it's done, there's no going back. You'll never be human again." Elara reached for his hand, holding it firmly. "I'm certain. I've watched you struggle with your nature, felt your guilt through our bond, and I'm not naive about what I'm choosing. I know I'll have to feed on humans. I know I'll have to kill or harm others to survive. I know I'll become a predator, but I also know that with you beside me, teaching me control, sharing the burden of conscience, I can learn to manage it. We'll face the darkness together, just as we faced everything else together." Lucian pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Through the bond, she felt the dam of his emotions breaking, relief and terror and love and anguish, all flooding through him at once. "When?" he asked against her hair. "When do you want to do this?" She pulled back enough to look at his face, seeing tears tracking down his pale cheeks. "Soon, before I lose my courage, before I start overthinking it. Tonight, if you're willing." He closed his eyes, and she felt him gathering his resolve, preparing himself for what he was about to do. "Tonight, then." "But Elara, the transformation is painful. The process of dying and being reborn is agony. I need you to understand that. I need you to be prepared for it." She cupped his face in her hands, making him look at her. "I survived 24 years of emotional death. I can survive the pain of physical transformation. I'm stronger than you think, Lucian. Stronger than I used to be. You helped me discover that strength." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, pouring everything he felt into the connection between them. When they separated, his expression had settled into grim determination. "We'll do it properly. We'll prepare. You should eat a final meal. Drink water, say goodbye to your human body in whatever way feels right. And then, when you're ready, we'll begin." Elara felt surprisingly calm, a sense of rightness settling over her like a cloak. This was the correct decision, the path she was meant to take. She had been given a second chance at life when the curse broke, and now she was choosing to extend that life indefinitely, to refuse the limitation of mortality in favor of endless possibility. They went inside, and Elara moved through the manor with new awareness, seeing it through human eyes for the last time. She prepared a simple meal, tasting each bite with conscious attention, savoring the flavors that she would never experience in quite the same way again. Vampire taste buds were different, Lucian had explained. Food became ash in their mouths, only blood held appeal. She wrote a letter to her distant relatives, the few Thornwood family members who remained, explaining that she would be traveling abroad indefinitely and they should not expect to hear from her. She would need to disappear from human society, at least until enough time had passed that no one would recognize her unchanged appearance. As night deepened, Elara bathed and dressed in a simple white gown, the same one she had worn when they created the blood bond. It seemed fitting somehow, symbolic of the transformation she was about to undergo. She found Lucian in their bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, with his head in his hands. And through the bond she felt his turmoil. He wanted this, and dreaded it in equal measure, desperate to keep her forever, but terrified of what he was about to do to her. "Lucian," she said softly, and he looked up at her with haunted silver eyes. "I'm ready. Don't torment yourself anymore. This is my choice, freely made. I want this." He stood slowly, moving to her with the predatory grace that characterized his kind. "The process is simple but brutal. I'll feed from you, drain you almost completely. You'll feel yourself dying. It will be cold and dark and frightening. Your heart will stop. Your breathing will cease. And then, in that moment between death and true death, I'll feed you my blood. A lot of it. Enough to trigger the transformation. Your body will come back to life, but wrong, changed, vampiric. The pain of your cells transforming will be intense. It typically lasts several hours, though it will feel longer. I'll be with you through all of it, holding you, suffering with you through our bond." Elara nodded her understanding, refusing to let fear change her mind. "I trust you. I trust us. Let's do this." She climbed onto the bed, lying back against the pillows, and Lucian joined her, positioning himself above her. His expression was anguished, torn between desire and revulsion at what he was about to do. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I love you more than I've ever loved anything, and I'm so sorry for the pain I'm about to cause you." She reached up to stroke his face tenderly. "Don't apologize for giving me eternity. Now stop stalling and change me." He laughed slightly, a broken sound, then leaned down to kiss her one last time, with human lips, human warmth, human heartbeat. Then his mouth moved to her neck, finding the familiar spot where he had fed from her many times before, though never like this, never with the intention of taking everything. "I love you," she whispered one final time as a human, and then she felt his teeth pierce her skin. The feeding started normally, the brief pain, the rush of pleasure, the intimate connection of giving herself to him. But Lucian didn't stop when he usually would. He continued drinking, pulling more blood from her, and gradually the pleasure began to fade, replaced by cold. So much cold. Elara felt her body temperature dropping as her blood flowed out of her, felt her heartbeat becoming erratic, felt weakness spreading through her limbs. Through the bond, she felt Lucian's agony at what he was doing, felt him forcing himself to continue, despite every instinct screaming at him to stop, to not hurt her, to not kill her. The cold intensified until she was shivering violently, her teeth chattering, her whole body convulsing. Her vision began to dim at the edges, darkness creeping in, and distantly she was aware that she was dying, that this was what death felt like, not peaceful, not gentle, but terrifying and cold and utterly final. Her heartbeat slowed, skipped, struggled. She tried to draw breath and couldn't, her lungs refusing to work. Panic flooded through her, the primal terror of suffocation, of dying. And she felt Lucian's matching panic through the bond as he experienced her death throes alongside her. Then her heart stopped, just stopped, and the world went black and silent and empty in a way that even her cursed years had never been empty. This was true death, true nothingness, the end of everything. For an eternal moment, Elara existed in that void. Consciousness without body, thought without form, and she understood that she was gone, that she had crossed the threshold from which there was no return. But then something, pressure on her lips, liquid cold and thick and wrong, flowing into her mouth, down her throat. Lucian's blood, so much of it flooding her system, calling her back from death. Her body responded against all natural law, her heart lurching into motion again. But the beat was wrong, too slow, too heavy. Her lungs expanded, pulling in air that she didn't truly need anymore. And then the pain hit. Oh God, the pain. Every cell in her body seemed to be tearing itself apart and reassembling wrong. Fire raced through her veins, burning away her humanity and replacing it with something other. Her bones felt like they were splintering, her muscles like they were being shredded. She tried to scream but couldn't make sound, could only writhe in Lucian's arms as he held her through the transformation, his own tears falling on her face as he experienced echoes of her agony through their bond. Time lost meaning. There was only pain, endless and consuming, transforming her from the inside out. She felt her senses heightening to painful intensity. Every sound became deafening, every scent overwhelming, every sensation magnified 1,000-fold. Her body was changing in fundamental ways, becoming stronger, faster, other. The humanity was being burned out of her, replaced by something predatory and powerful and terrifyingly alien. Through it all, she clung to Lucian's presence in her mind, to the bond that anchored her to sanity, to the knowledge that he had survived this, and so could she. Gradually, infinitely slowly, the pain began to recede. Her body settled into its new form, accepting the changes, adjusting to vampiric existence. Her heartbeat stabilized into the slow, heavy rhythm that would characterize the rest of her eternal life. Her breathing, though unnecessary, fell into a pattern that mimicked human respiration out of habit, and her senses, though still overwhelming, became manageable as her brain learned to process the increased input. Elara opened her eyes and gasped. The world looked different. Colors were more vivid, details sharper. She could see individual dust motes floating in the air, could count the threads in the fabric of the curtains across the room, could perceive things in the darkness that human eyes could never detect. She could hear Lucian's slow heartbeat, the rustle of fabric, distant sounds from outside, an owl hunting, small creatures moving through the garden, the wind through trees, and the smells. Oh, the smells were intense and complex, layers upon layers of scent information that threatened to overwhelm her. She turned her head to look at Lucian, and what she saw made her breath catch. He was beautiful in a way she hadn't fully perceived as a human. Every detail of his face was crystal clear, from individual eyelashes to the fine texture of his skin. But more than that, she could smell him, his unique scent, the vampiric essence that marked him as her kind now, and underneath it all the faint trace of blood. Her blood, which he had consumed, and with that awareness came hunger. Sudden, vicious, overwhelming hunger that cramped her stomach and made her throat burn. She needed blood, needed it with an intensity that shocked her, needed it more than she had ever needed anything. Lucian must have seen the change in her eyes because his expression grew cautious, and through the bond she felt his wariness mixed with sympathy. "The hunger," he said quietly. "It's hitting you now, isn't it?" Elara nodded, not trusting herself to speak, afraid of what might come out. The hunger was consuming, demanding, reducing her to pure need. She understood now, in a way she couldn't have before, why Lucian struggled so much with his nature. This hunger didn't care about morality or ethics or the sanctity of human life. It wanted blood, demanded blood, would drive her to any action necessary to obtain it. "I've prepared for this," Lucian said, rising from the bed with fluid grace. "I hunted earlier, brought back—" He paused, seeming reluctant to continue. "I brought back a human, someone who won't be missed, someone who was causing harm. He's unconscious in the cellar. You can feed from him, learn control in a safe environment where I can supervise." Part of Elara recoiled at the idea. She was about to hurt someone, to use them as prey. But the hunger was stronger than her conscience, burning away her hesitation with pure need. She stood, marveling at how different her body felt, stronger, faster, perfectly balanced. Every movement was effortless, powerful in a way her human body had never been. She followed Lucian downstairs to the cellar, and as they descended, she became aware of another heartbeat, could smell blood pumping through living veins. The hunger intensified until it was almost maddening, until she could think of nothing else but the need to feed, to taste, to satisfy this burning emptiness inside her. In the cellar, a man lay on a cot, still unconscious from whatever Lucian had done to subdue him. He looked ordinary, middle-aged, no one she would look twice at under normal circumstances. But now all she saw was prey, was sustenance, was the promise of satisfaction for the hunger tearing through her. "Go slowly," Lucian instructed, his voice gentle but firm. "Take what you need, but stop before you kill him. You'll feel the moment when you've taken enough. His heart will start to falter, his pulse will weaken significantly. That's when you must stop." Elara approached the man, her movements predatory without conscious thought. She knelt beside the cot, and her fangs, when had she grown fangs, descended automatically. She didn't hesitate, didn't allow herself time to think about what she was doing. She struck, piercing the man's neck, and blood flooded her mouth. The taste was indescribable. Hot and sweet and rich, nothing like the cold blood she had drunk from Lucian. This was life itself flowing into her, sating the terrible hunger, filling the emptiness inside her. She drank deeply, desperately, lost in sensation and satisfaction. Through the bond, she felt Lucian monitoring her, felt his tension as he watched her feed, ready to intervene if she lost control. But some part of her remained aware, remained alert to the man's weakening pulse. When she felt his heart begin to falter, when she sensed she had taken too much and another mouthful might kill him, she forced herself to stop. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, pulling away when every instinct screamed at her to drain him completely. But she did it, separating herself from the source of blood, sitting back on her heels and trembling with the effort of restraint. Lucian was beside her immediately, pulling her into his arms. And through their bond, she felt his fierce pride, his relief that she had maintained control, his love for her strength of will. "You did it," he murmured against her hair. "Your first feeding and you showed restraint. That's remarkable, Elara. Most new vampires can't stop themselves. Most would have killed him." Elara was shaking, though not from weakness, from the effort of self-control, from the overwhelming newness of everything, from the recognition of what she had just done. She had fed on a human being, had used him as prey, had taken his blood without his consent or awareness. The moral weight of it crashed into her, and she felt tears, cold vampire tears, sliding down her cheeks. "I hurt him," she whispered. "I hurt another person. I'm a monster now, just like you warned me I would become." Lucian turned her to face him, his silver eyes intense. "You're not a monster. You're a vampire who showed control and conscience during her first feeding. Yes, you hurt him. Yes, you used him as prey. But you didn't kill him, and that matters. That's the difference between being a mindless monster and being someone who fights their nature every day to minimize harm." She leaned against him, processing this new reality of her existence. The hunger was satisfied now, the burning need gone, replaced by a warm fullness that felt right in her transformed body. But the guilt remained, the knowledge that this was her life now, feeding on humans, causing harm, being a predator. "How do you live with it?" she asked quietly. "How do you feed over and over, century after century, and not go mad with guilt?" Lucian stroked her hair gently. "Some days I don't know. Some days the weight of it crushes me. But then I look at you, I feel you through our bond, and I remember why I keep going. Because you're here. Because we have each other. Because even monsters deserve love, deserve companionship, deserve moments of peace between the darkness." Elara pulled back to look at him. Seeing her own reflection in his eyes, she looked the same but different, paler, sharper, more predatory. "We're monsters together then, forever," he smiled sadly. "Forever. But we'll be monsters who try, who fight our nature, who seek to minimize harm. That has to count for something." They left the man in the cellar. He would wake eventually with no memory of what had happened, only weakness and confusion, and returned upstairs. As they climbed the stairs, Elara became intensely aware of the manor around her, could hear every creak and settle, smell the dust and age and history soaked into the walls. Her enhanced senses painted a picture far more detailed than anything she had experienced as a human. "Everything is so intense," she said as they entered the bedroom. "How do you process all this sensory input without going insane?" Lucian smiled. "It becomes normal eventually. Your brain will learn to filter, to focus on what's important and ignore the rest. Give it time. Time. She had so much time now. Centuries, millennia perhaps, stretching ahead endlessly. The thought was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. "What do we do now?" she asked, echoing the question she had asked the night their curses broke. "What do we do with eternity?" Lucian pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, hearing the slow, steady beat of his unnecessary heart. "We live," he said, the same answer he had given before. "We travel, we learn, we experience everything the world has to offer. We face the darkness together and celebrate the light when we find it. We love each other through the centuries, through whatever challenges come. We make our eternity mean something." Elara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of forever settling onto her shoulders, but also feeling Lucian's presence through their bond, steady and constant and reassuring. She had chosen this path, had deliberately left her humanity behind in favor of immortality beside the one person who truly understood her. There would be difficult days ahead, struggles with her new nature, moral battles over feeding and existence. But there would also be beauty, love, endless possibility, and the comfort of never being alone again. 300 years later, Elara and Lucian stood together on a cliff overlooking the sea, not Thornwood Cliff, which had long since eroded away, but a new cliff in a new land. The world had changed almost beyond recognition from the one Elara had known as a human. Technology had advanced in ways that seemed like magic. Nations had risen and fallen. The human population had exploded, making feeding easier in some ways, more complicated in others. Through it all, they had remained together, bound by blood and love and shared experience. They had traveled the world, seen wonders and horrors, experienced centuries of history unfolding. They had learned to manage their predatory natures, developing a system of feeding that minimized harm, taking small amounts from many people rather than draining a few. They had found other vampires, built careful alliances, navigated the complex political structures of immortal society, but mostly they had simply loved each other through the endless march of years. The bond between them had deepened until they sometimes couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. They had survived wars, plagues, persecution, the constant danger of discovery by humans who would destroy them if they knew what they were. Through it all, the connection forged on that blood moon night in 1840 had sustained them, given them purpose, made immortality bearable. "Do you ever regret it?" Elara asked, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that her enhanced vision perceived with crystalline clarity. "Do you ever wish I had chosen mortality, that you had been spared the burden of my transformation?" Through their bond, she felt Lucian's immediate response: fierce denial, absolute certainty, unwavering devotion. "Never," he said firmly, pulling her against his side. "Not once in 3 centuries have I regretted giving you eternity. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Elara. You saved me from the curse, from loneliness, from the emptiness. You gave me a reason to keep existing when I had none." She smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I was thinking today about that night on the cliff, about how close I came to jumping, to ending everything before I ever knew what it meant to feel, to love, to live." She turned to look at him, this beautiful ancient creature who had searched 3 centuries for her. "Thank you for stopping me. Thank you for showing me that even cursed and broken as we were, we deserved a chance at happiness." Lucian cupped her face in his hands, the gesture as tender now as it had been 300 years ago. "We weren't broken. We were unfinished, and together we became complete." He kissed her, and Elara felt the same rush of love and desire and connection that she had felt on that first night. Proof that some things didn't diminish with time, but only grew stronger. When they separated, Elara looked back out at the sea, at the endless horizon, at the vast world that stretched before them. They had eternity together, an eternity to explore, to grow, to love. It wouldn't always be easy. They were predators, monsters, creatures who survived by harming others. The guilt of that would never entirely fade. The moral weight would never stop pressing on their consciences. But they would face it together as they had faced everything else. 2 souls who had been cursed to never feel love, who had found each other under a blood moon, who had chosen to bind themselves together for all eternity. They were monsters, yes, but they were monsters who loved, who tried, who fought every day to be better than their natures demanded. And in the end, perhaps that was enough. Perhaps being monsters who refused to surrender their humanity, or in Elara's case, the memory of humanity, was its own form of redemption. "Come on," Lucian said, taking her hand. "The night is young, and we have forever. Let's make it count." Elara laced her fingers through his, feeling the perfect fit of their hands together, the physical manifestation of their soul-deep bond. "Forever," she agreed, and together they walked away from the cliff's edge, turning their backs on the abyss that had once called to them both, choosing instead to face their endless future side by side. 2 cursed souls who had found salvation in each other, who had transformed pain into love, isolation into connection, emptiness into fullness. Their story didn't have a traditional happy ending, because their story had no ending at all. Just an eternal continuation, an infinite unfolding of moments shared between two people who understood that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that refuse to end, that persist through centuries and challenges and darkness, that burn on, refusing to be extinguished. As they disappeared into the night together, the last light of sunset fading behind them, one truth remained absolute and unshakable. She had been cursed to never feel love, until a vampire kissed her under the blood moon. And that kiss, that single moment of breaking free from their curses, had changed everything. It had given them both back their souls, their capacity for feeling, their reason for existing. It had transformed two separate tragedies into one shared triumph. And it had proven that even in darkness, even in curses and monstrosity and impossible circumstances, love could take root and flourish. Not the easy love of fairy tales, but the hard-won love of two people who chose each other despite everything, who built something beautiful out of broken pieces, who refused to let their natures define them. That kind of love, forged in suffering and sustained through centuries, was worth any price, any sacrifice, any darkness they had to navigate. And so they walked on into their eternity, together always, bound by blood and soul, and the memory of a blood moon night when two cursed hearts finally learned to beat as one.